Welcome back. Platinum stars to all those that have made it back to their seats. For those of you out there watching on the big screen and enjoying a cup of coffee and sitting at those tables, we're happy to see you in here too. I understand that some people, in fact, have clicked on to the stream and have been seeing this online. So those of you watching on the web, welcome. Our next session is about reform. In the last year and a half, MAS started to explore several initiatives, including zoning reform. Our panel will continue our discussion about the 1961 zoning resolution and its ability to guide the city's future. Before the panel, we will hear from Philip Howard, our esteemed board member and former board chairman, who is known nationally as a leader of legal reform. He is a best-selling author, frequent political advisor, also advisor to us, on legal and regulatory reform issues, and the founder of Common Good, a national bipartisan coalition organized to restore common sense to American law. As MAS board chairman, he helped devise MAS's political strategy to advocate for the full realization of Moynihan Station in the Farley Post Office building, and chaired the Citizens Committee to organize support and funding for the Tribune and Light Memorial, among many, many other accomplishments. Please join me in welcoming Philip Howard. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, man. Thank you all. It's an honor to be at this Love Fest for New York. I moved to New York having never really been here before about 40 years ago, and I just couldn't believe what I found. You could be anybody you wanted to be. It was the land of opportunity, and I wasn't particularly worried about supporting the family I didn't have at that point. So one day I was a photographer for Condé Nast. The next day I was watering plants at Lincoln Center to make ends meet. And the next day I was working part-time as a researcher at a foundation. Earlier it said that bicycling had only recently come on the radar screen. My first publication was The Bicyclist Guide to Manhattan, published in 1971 by the Fund for the City of New York and the New York Times, which I'm the proud author of. It sold 6 copies. But New York is this great place where the thing that excited me is you could be anything you wanted to be, and if you could pull it off, this was a place that would allow you to do it. And the dynamics of this city come from many places. It comes from the extraordinarily diverse and interested group of people. It comes from the enormously rich cultural heritage maintained by many of us here today. It also is blessed from time to time, and I think in the last 12 years or 10 years, by great leadership. But it also requires infrastructure, and infrastructure that supports the dynamic give and take among all the citizens of this city. Some of this is physical infrastructure mandated by the zoning code, this wonderful Jane Jacobs marketplace that we have with stores on sidewalks that was built up over time, first organically and then as a result of the 1916 zoning code. Also the subways and such that we all rely upon every day. What I'd like to suggest to you in a few minutes today is that New York is woefully lacking, however, in one area of infrastructure which will be a damper on the culture of the city and our competitiveness in years to come if we don't address it. And that's our legal infrastructure. Over the last 100 years, the laws and regulations of New York City and of other levels of government have piled up like sediment in the harbor until at a point that nobody could possibly know them all. I haven't actually counted all the words of law that affect New York City. Federal law, many of which does affect, is 140 million words of federal law. No one could know it. There are 140,000 healthcare reimbursement categories, including 21 categories for spacecraft-related injuries. This law, you know, everyone sees something wrong, they pass a rule or regulation, and then no one goes back and cleans it out and says, well, do we really need this anymore? And so we have this basically rusted out, almost 19th century legal infrastructure. And what I'd like to suggest is there are 3 areas that we need tackling as soon as possible. The first is the zoning code, and we're going to have a panel talk about it in a second. There have been many improvements to the zoning code under this administration towards contextual zoning, but it's still built on the platform of the 1961 zoning code, which was done in that first flush of modernism where they thought cities would be better if you had buildings surrounded by plazas. Now, most of us now know that that's completely antithetical to the vibrancy of our city. It gives us First Avenue on the Upper East Side, where you get sort of tall towers with gaps in between the stores, and it's places that they wouldn't exist if it weren't for the areas near them that were so beautiful and vibrant. One of the great zoning innovations and protections of our lifetime is not the zoning code at all, but the landmarks law, which preserved, for example, the Upper East Side Historic District so that the premier luxury shopping district of the world, which is Madison Avenue from 60th Street up to 96th Street, would have been wiped out. It would look like First Avenue, but for that historic district. And if the citizens of New York were to see a build-out of what their neighborhoods would look like in Queens and the Bronx and Staten Island, as well as in Manhattan, with the current 1961 zoning resolution, they would be horrified. They would be horrified. It has nothing to do with the character. It doesn't mean we shouldn't develop. We should develop. But we should develop in a way that honors what's rich and vital about this city. And I submit it requires starting over. We need to do what they did in 1961. They started over and created a lousy code. And now we need to start over again and create one that recognizes what I think most of us involved in city planning would agree enhances the vibrancy of our city. The second area of legal infrastructure that needs overhauling, the regulatory system for small business. You cannot start a business in New York City and comply with the regulations. You couldn't hire the lawyer to tell you what the regulations are. It's too complicated. You have to go to multiple agencies. It's an exercise in frustration. Again, this administration has been valiant in trying to simplify regulations, and I have a team of volunteer lawyers working with the administration, taking on certain areas, but no one has recognized that what's really needed is to create an entirely new system that's actually friendly for people who want to do business in the city, where you can go to a government official whose job it is to help you comply with regulation, to help walk you through the process, not go to multiple agencies and such. And if we created that system, it would be the best investment in the world, because people would say, oh, I know, I can go down to this place, and if I want to build a store, or if I want to hire employees, there are people there who can actually help me comply with the legitimate goals of government in regulating the city. And again, this administration has made some strides toward that, but it needs to be a fundamental shift towards a cooperative system for small business. Big business can take care of themselves. Small business needs help. So if we want that vitality, we're going to have to help them out. The third area that desperately needs reworking has to do with the management of government. We need government in a dense city. It's incredibly important. Regulation is more important in a crowded, anonymous, interdependent city than it was even 100 years ago. We don't want restaurants pouring grease down the drain. We don't want people polluting the air. I mean, there's so many things that are needed. There's so many regulatory traffic cops needed. It's unavoidable in a crowded city. But we have a city government that is virtually unmanageable. You can't hire somebody sensibly. It takes 6 to 9 months based on rigid sort of test scores with 1,000 different job classifications. So it drives good people away. You can't reassign people. That's subject to very rigid seniority codes and such. You can't tell people what to do. Again, these 1,000 job classifications, literally, there are stories where somebody's job is to put the numbers on the piece of paper, but not to add them up. That sort of thing. And you can't fire them at all unless they commit a crime. So you have this system where all these, supposedly to protect the public employees, but it doesn't protect the public employees. It's suffocating. It drives good people away. All you have to do is talk to anybody who works in government or talk to any teacher about the bureaucracy. It's crushing them. We need an entirely new management system for government. We need government more, not less, but we need it to actually focus on delivering the services that we need, and instead we have this hidebound system that doesn't work, with all due respect, for anyone. And the people, the interests that keep it in place, which include the public unions, have a perfectly valid role, but it's not a role of avoiding management. You know, our tax base, how much we spend, what kind of services we get, depends on people being able to do the most they can, not the least they can. And sometimes it seems like the structure is designed to do the opposite. So here we are, we're in the 21st century, we have all these opportunities. We're not competing against Stanford or Philadelphia, we're competing against Shanghai, we're competing against London. We need a base, a physical base, but also a legal base that will encourage the same kind of innovation and the same sort of energy that's brought all of us here. And that requires us, just as we must make the subways work better, and they do work better now, we have to make all these legal structures work better so that New York is affordable, it provides opportunities for people to start new businesses, and it creates neighborhoods that people like to be in. And all of those goals require significant change. Thank you.